Hi everyone, this is Selvi. Today's interview question is whether DOR, DOD and acceptance criteria is the same. What is the difference between DOD and acceptance criteria? So DOR and DOD are checklist. DOR is definition of ready checklist, DOD is definition of done checklist. This checklist can have any number of items. Generally, these items are specific to the team and the nature of the product that we are working. DOR and DOD will be keep on getting changed. That is the reason we call these checklists as dynamic checklist. The time when we will be adding or improvising the things is during the retrospective meeting. So at the beginning of the project, at the beginning of the project setup and the agile ways of working, we will be first initiating the definition of ready and definition of done checklist. These two checklists are created by every member of the team. That means as a team activity, we will be preparing this checklist facilitated by the Scrum Master. Examples of these checklist items, for example, definition of ready. What is definition of ready targeted with? There are n number of items in the product backlog. On what basis we can pick up those items as part of the sprint? That means what is the criteria that a backlog item, that is the work item in the product backlog, can be pulled and be a part of the sprint backlog? Product owner has a priority. That priority alone cannot make the work item ready for the sprint backlog. For example, if we have a work item which is with high priority, but still we don't have clarity, we don't have the designs, what we need to implement, and we are not sure about completely the acceptance criteria, then how can we even think of making that as part of the sprint backlog? Because it has a lot of uncertainties. The whole idea is during the part of the refinement meeting, ensuring that we are meeting the definition of ready checklist met. When we say meeting the definition of ready checklist, the checklist can have many items. Like for example, acceptance criteria is available for the story. The story is adhering to the guidelines, and we have written the non-functional requirements specifically. Testing requirements are made available. UI UX wireframes are available. These are some of the checklist items that can be added as part of the definition of ready checklist. So when the work item is meeting all these checklist items, then the work item is ready to be pulled for the sprint backlog. What is the disadvantage if we are pulling without meeting this checklist? The disadvantage is we are not sure whether we will be able to have a smooth execution if we are not making this ready. That means there are chances that these dependencies can become a blocker and make our execution into halt state. Now we have made the list and we made it ready and we are executing. But during the execution as a team, we felt that, okay, there are some more things that we can add it in the definition of ready because we have not talked about that, but it is really important. Like for example, documentation update is required or not. Now what we will be doing at the end of the sprint, when we have our sprint retrospective meeting, as a team, we will again align on this point and we will make changes in the definition of ready. So in a nutshell, definition of ready is a checklist, which is a dynamic checklist, which helps us in identifying what are the items that we need to meet so that the work item can be moved from the product backlog to sprint backlog and make it available for the sprint execution. This checklist can undergo improvisation process with the help of the retrospective meeting. So we know now what is definition of ready. Now definition of done is very simple. When the work items are getting executed in the sprint, product owner has some kind of expectation in every work item that we are executing as a team. So to ensure when we are completing the work, on what basis the work item will be accepted by the product owner, for that we are creating this checklist. Definition of done is again a checklist that is also a dynamic checklist, which helps us in identifying the work list items or the list of items that will ensure what are the items that can be accepted by the product owner. Like for example, we have written the code, but we have not written the unit test cases. We have not completed the review process. Then how can it be even considered as complete? So when we say complete as a team, when we say it is done, there should be certain things that we need to ensure that we have completed. So this definition of done checklist helps us in understanding what are the items that we need to complete so that we can claim that work item is done. Now, examples of this checklist items. Code coverage with certain percentage, meeting acceptance criteria, review process is completed, documentation is updated, test results are associated, acceptance tests have been passed, performance test report has been attached. All these things are some of the examples of the checklist items of this definition of done checklist. So definition of done checklist will also undergo the improvisation process during the retrospective meeting, when as a team we feel that some more items can be added so that we will be able to make it much more better. So in that way we can add some more items. So now we understand definition of ready and definition of done. Before going to the acceptance criteria, I will once again explain the quick differences what we see in definition of ready and definition of done, even the similarities as well. Definition of ready is a checklist. Definition of done is also a checklist. Definition of ready is a dynamic checklist. Definition of done is also a dynamic checklist. Definition of ready undergoes improvisation through retrospective meetings. Definition of done also undergoes improvisation through retrospective meetings. Definition of ready is prepared by the team, facilitated by the Scrum Master. Definition of done is also prepared by the team, facilitated by the Scrum Master. This definition of ready ensures that we need to meet all these checklist items to ensure that the work item should be picked from the product backlog and made it available as part of the sprint backlog. Definition of done is a checklist that ensures the checklist items are met so that we can claim that the work item is done and it can be accepted by the product owner or the technical architect or the technical lead, because some of the work items will be accepted by the technical lead or the technical architect. What are those items? A spike, technical user story, technical depths. Those are the items which will be given more clarity by the technical lead or the architect, so they will be the right person to accept it. Now we understood definition of ready and definition of done. In both the places I use the word acceptance criteria. What is this acceptance criteria all about? Acceptance criteria covers all the details of that particular work item in a way that explains the requirement details completely. Acceptance criteria covers the use cases that need to be covered so that we will be able to say that we have implemented this requirement. Like for example, let's take login as a functionality. This login functionality need to have so many different use cases that need to be satisfied. Like in the login page, there should be two text fields which are called as login username and login password, and there are text fields, and the text fields can accept both alphanumeric characters in both the fields, and the password is case sensitive, and whenever the password or the username is missed, we need to show that these are mandatory fields as a warning. These all are the use cases. So where are we going to capture all these things? These all things are going to be captured in the acceptance criteria. Now this acceptance criteria is going to help the developer to develop the use cases for the particular functionality. This acceptance criteria is the one that tester is going to refer to create the acceptance test. What are acceptance tests? Acceptance tests are the tests that are written against the acceptance criteria items, so that when the work item is developed, tester will run these acceptance tests to ensure whether we are really meeting the expectation or not. If the expectation is not met, tester will be raising a defect. That is the reason when we say that definition of done checklist, we mention acceptance test should get passed. When we say acceptance test should get passed, that means all the acceptance criteria has been tested and all the things are working as per the expectation. Then why we need to have this anyway? Definition of done, we are capturing the acceptance criteria as possible. So what is the significance of this acceptance criteria? As I mentioned, this is the place where PO is putting all the details about the requirement with the help of different use cases, both functional and non-functional requirements. Any performance related scenarios, anything related to documentation update, all the details will be captured as part of the acceptance criteria. Whether testing is required in this user story or not, because in some technical user stories, we may not need testing. It may be just a revamp. We would have captured that as part of end-to-end testing in some other scenario. So dedicated testing may not be required. So where are we capturing all those things, especially in this acceptance criteria? So now, DOR and DOD is common for all the work items. We will not create DOD for user story, DOD for defect, DOD for technical spec. For user story 1, we will create a DOD, we will create a DOR. No, not like that. DOR and DOD are checklists that are available common for all the work items. During execution, if something is not applicable, we will make it as NA and we will proceed. Because some of the places, for example, in cases where we are fixing a defect, document update may not be required. In cases where a document update is required, we may not be touching the code. So depends on the place where we are working. We need to make it whether it is applicable or not. But DOR and DOD checklist are common across all the places. Now coming to acceptance criteria is specific to a work item. When I say the login functionality related acceptance criteria, I cannot use it for add functionality of the product. So there is a difference between this and that. Like acceptance criteria is specific to each and every work item. Every work item will have its own acceptance criteria, because acceptance criteria is going to capture the relevant requirement details of that work item alone. Okay. So I just want to make it clear what is DOR, DOD and acceptance criteria difference in this particular topic. In this particular interview question, this is one of the important interview question. Generally, we need to understand DOR, DOD and acceptance criteria, similarities and the differences. Hope this particular episode would have helped you all to understand the differences and similarities of DOR, DOD and acceptance criteria. Thank you so much for listening. Happy learning and stay tuned.